today is the podcast where we should potentially step away, maybe not from ISL entirely, but from ISL season 2020 a little bit, and speak more about swimming and yourself a little bit. People want to know who you are. You've been a guest of this podcast for so long. You've been a CBS commentator. You've been a swimming coach for what, 30, 40 years now?
Yeah, 42.
Oh wow, people need to know that. But to begin the podcast, Byron, I know you swam yourself previously. Do you want to speak a little bit about your swimming career?
Yeah, sure. My folks are Canadian, but they actually moved to the U.S. So I actually grew up in Chicago most of my life, and was part of a very, very good program there. And it's interesting. People ask me, why did you coach? And Ivan, it's interesting because I never thought I was going to be a coach. There's some people that, by the time they hit the end of high school or university, they're planning on being coaches. And I got a business degree at university. I never intended to coach. And when I ended up backing into coaching sort of by default, I look back on it, and the sort of the coaches that I had through my career, and this is a sort of an interesting observation, is the guy that I had in high school one of the two guys ended up being, in the Hall of Fame, one of the most decorated high school coaches ever. The other guy Ray Essick, ended up being the CEO of American Swimming for 20 years. Then a guy that I had when I was at school at the University of Michigan ended up being the youngest ever Olympic coach. And then I even went up to a program in Thunder Bay in Canada, and they brought in Don Talbot, the renowned Australian coach that I believe was voted the coach of the half century, I think, from 1950 to 2000. So I was under some really, really influential guys, and I think it somehow seeped into my psyche how much they loved it and what they did and how much they accomplished. And I think all of a sudden, I always loved the sport, but I just I think that sort of showed me that maybe coaching would be something that I'd want to do. So through that, because I had those good coaches, I got to, as I would argue, as high as I could with the talent that I was blessed with. So I was able to go to the Olympic Games, finish in the final. Mark, those that are old enough will remember that Mark Spitz was the precursor to Michael Phelps, and he won 7 gold medals back in the 72 Olympics. And I was just a couple lanes over from Mark and finished 6th in the 100-meter butterfly. And there's what we call the Queen's Games, the Commonwealth Games between the Queen's countries, England, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, et cetera. And I won a couple of gold medals in those and a silver medal and some others. And World Student Games in Moscow, I was ecstatic to go to Moscow in 1973 because, of course, it was the middle of the Cold War, and I wanted to see what it was like. And I won a silver medal in those games. So I was able to do have some international success. And once I retired, I missed the 76 team. Once I retired, I happened to be talking to somebody on the deck that day of the trials, and they said, "Hey, we need a coach here in Toronto. You want to stick around?" And I decided, why not? So that's how I got into coaching.
Okay, makes sense. What do you think of Moscow in 1973?
Well, it was interesting on many different fronts. And of course, all we had was Western propaganda that it was the evil empire. So we had to take that into account. The buildings were humongous, like big, old, and there weren't a lot of new buildings in my mind, what we could see anyway. We stayed in the Moscow was it the Moscow? I think it was the university anyway, right? Anyway, it was
Moscow State University, probably.
It was massive, a massive brick mortar building, right? And we only had so many floors. Obviously, it wasn't that many people, but it was huge. And I just found that shopping was a little bit of a challenge, just because you had to stand in line to pick something out, and then you had to go into a different line to pay for it, and then you had to bring the receipt back to show the guy and stand in line again to show the guy that showed you the thing in the first place that you were allowed to buy it, right? So it just, one of the guys joked that there's no unemployment because at any time 10% of the country's standing in line or something, right? So
that is a damn good joke. Wow.
So again, it was one of those things where you're taking a look at it that it seemed like there was tension, and it also, the other part that I thought was very interesting is that there were a lot of elderly people that were working, and you didn't see that as much in North America at the time anyway, and some of the more menial jobs, I will admit, right? Street sweepers and other things like that. So those were kind of the major changes, I suppose.
Maybe they just age faster.
Yeah.
Who knows?
It was a tough period back then, right? And I shouldn't admit this, but we but we did bring over some extra blue jeans and sell them on the black market while we were there in the basement of the swimming pool.
You gotta make some money where you can, especially as a swimmer in 1973.
Yeah, we weren't allowed to make any money back then. That's for sure, right? So,
thank you, Byron. What about when you started coaching? Did you have somewhat of a mentor in the coaching community?
Well, yes and no. All right, and I mean that's a wishy-washy answer, but it's true in the sense that the guy that coached me when I was at university probably was my mentor in the sense of I think I based a lot of my approach on how he coached, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And then I had another mentor that basically he coached me for a half a year when I started a master's degree at the University of Toronto. And he was my mentor in the sense that he looked out for me, and then he was willing to actually step aside as the coach at Toronto to bring me in to become the coach. He said, I can take it to the national level, but I have real faith that you can take the program to the international level. And so I thought that was a gigantic move on his part to really step aside from coaching. He liked coaching, but he had a few other interests. And so he let me come in and take over the program. And that was, obviously a great thing in my life to be able to take this program over. And then at times he would give me ideas on fundraising and ideas for meets and programming, and he helped build a 50-meter pool on campus, which of course was a big deal. So I think those would be my two mentors. And when you have really great coaches like I had, you have to pick up the knowledge that you think works for you. And I'll give you a really interesting insight, Ivan. And most of the coaches in the United States, I think it's changed a little bit now, but a lot of coaches, maybe all over the world, they're kind of like generals. And the athletes are like little soldiers that are, sent into battle. And you don't question the general very often. You don't question the orders. And so that was several of the coaches that I had were great coaches, but there's no question they walked on water. I mean, they were pretty powerful dudes. I kind of, the guy when I was at university, he was like that, but he was a little bit more understanding, and there was a bit of a camaraderie that kind of was developed amongst everybody on the team and the coach, and he still had power. But so in my first year, I coached at a small university at first, actually, Ivan, and then I moved to the bigger University of Toronto. And I decided that the University of Toronto, I was going to be a general. When I was at the smaller university, two of the swimmers on the team were like 2 years younger than I was. So I don't know, I kind of felt I kind of had to be friends with them, right? Because I actually trained with one of them the year before. So, and it worked. And we had a really great team when I was at that young university. Took them from 28th in the nation to 3rd within 2 years. So I was going to be the general. And I did not have an enjoyable first year being the general at this new team, because it's not my nature to be a hard ass. And I alienated one or two of the best swimmers on the team. And I realized that was not going to work for me. If I was going to stay in this coaching, I couldn't do it that way. And I don't think I'd be happy doing it. I would have got out of coaching. So I had to change my approach to be more fitting what I am. And my advice to any young coach out there is, be true to yourself. Don't do what you think is going to be successful if it's not going to make you happy about how you want to coach, right? And so I changed 180, well, not 180 degrees, but I did a philosophical shift. And I think it helped me a lot. And I think the program, succeeded much better, much quicker. And I think it was a valuable, I guess, quick learning lesson, right? So they always say you learn more from your mistakes. And we blew it the first year. We lost the national title and we should have won. So I learned a lot from that. And I swam my two best guys through the meet because there was the trials coming up. And I think it just hurt everybody, right? So you learn from your mistakes. So.
Okay. Wow, that seems like it's impressive how quick you learn from your mistake. Like one season and you already made the switch. It's
yeah, but I think that half of the reason was I think I was unhappy doing it. Be one thing if you were coaching, I don't know, if you're doing far too much sprint work with some athletes and you felt it wasn't working, you might not necessarily want to make a major change. You might want to give it longer, but if you were happy doing it, then you'd probably do it. Whereas, I was just not. It wasn't me. I wasn't selling myself properly, right? So.
Okay, makes sense. Byron, coaches, in my opinion, always walk sort of a thin line because a coach, from one point of view, is a professional helping out, usually a profession. But at the same time, a lot of the time, a coach becomes a friend. A coach becomes a parental figure almost to some of the athletes.
Yeah.
What do you think of the personal connection between an athlete and a coach? Can it become personal, or would that hurt the performance? And how do you keep the balance?
Yeah, I know. Well, we're in a hole social media world now where it's good and bad, I guess, right? I mean, there were some people that overstepped the bounds. We've heard about those in the past, right? But coaches overstep their bounds, and now it's gone the other way, where I know that one of the great American coaches, John Urbanchek, was driving to a training camp, and he wanted to drive Katie Ledecky to the training camp, and as Katie was getting in the car, she goes, "Isn't there anybody else here?" And he said, "Well, no." And she goes, "I can't get in the car with you." Right? Like, we're not allowed to be in unsupervised with a coach anywhere at any time. Right? And I don't know if Katie was 18 at the time. Maybe she was only 17. Right? But the point is that shouldn't have been an issue, but it's something that now everybody has to be aware of. Right? So you can't just be a buddy, even though it's all on the up and up. You just never know. Right? So John had to turn around, go back and go find another person, and then drive back another 20 minutes and pick up Katie and take her to workout. Right? So, but you learn what the rules are. So I always heard from, Bill Sweetenham was a great Australian coach. He ended up going in to help England and leading, at the turn of the century, and helped turn their program around, I would argue. And many people would say that he did a good job. And he always said to his athletes that he was very cut and dry. He says, "I am not going to be your friend. Ever, ever, ever. Don't think of me as your friend, but I am in your corner, and I will fight to the death to help you get to where you need to get to go." Right. And I thought that was a pretty good analysis. Is you don't necessarily want to get so close that you're too close. But you do. It's a very difficult thing to succeed at the world level. And the athletes do need to rely on you for a lot of support. And I think that's what it is. It's not friendship as much as it's really support. You can call it friendship because it is a form of that, but it's really, you're in their corner big time. So.
Makes sense. Thank you. What about, you say a coach is primarily a supporter. Did I get your statement correctly?
Yeah.
There's a myth that exists in swimming. It goes that there are some unique talents in this world that don't really require much coaching. People say that, for example, Michael Phelps or Caleb Dressel, athletes of this level, no matter what coach they would fall into, they would have succeeded in the world of swimming. Do you believe such talents exist? Or do you think that without proper coaching, there's no way to succeed in the world of swimming? Or maybe there is some middle grounds?
Yeah. Well, actually, I disagree. And the reason I disagree is that kind of a talent is going to succeed. There's no question. But they may not succeed as well. Like, in other words, there's just plain outright superstar talent out there. There's no question about it. I mean, Patrick Mahomes in NFL football, everybody loves him now. They think he's the greatest quarterback that's ever walked the planet. For those that follow NFL football. And he was going to succeed probably no matter where he went for university. And he went to a smaller school. And now he's in the NFL. And he was going to succeed in it. Because he's under better tutelage, maybe he's going to succeed even better. He's going to become maybe the greatest ever, as opposed to just a really good one, And I would argue that Michael had a very, very unique relationship with Coach Bob Bowman. And it was a unique situation with, Michael's father was not on the scene, and Bob ended up being a little bit of a father figure, I believe, right? If we say it, and it worked. And I think he got more out of Michael than I think a lot of other coaches might have gotten out of Michael. So Michael was going to be great anyway. You have to remember that, a bit of swimming is genetic. You're talking about a God-given talent or something. And, Michael's sister was a national champion in the 200 fly too. So, I mean, this family had good swimming genes in it. And so he was going to be good. But would his career have kept on track and done the things it did without a firm hand on the tiller? I'm not so sure. All right. So, there's an old adage. I don't know if somebody said it was a Chinese proverb or whatever, right? But, a man who coaches himself has a fool for a coach. So, like you can get to a point. I'll give you actually, you know what? I'll give you an insight, Ivan. After my first Olympics, I was deciding whether or not to keep going. And one summer I decided to coach myself, and I did it for, I think it was 6, 7, 8 weeks or something. And you know what? I did my lifetime best time. So you're kind of thinking, okay, I can coach myself. You can do it in the short term, but in a long term, you'd have to have phenomenal phenomenal self-discipline. And I just don't know if there's many people on the planet that have that, to be able to take it to the nth level. And I had great background, great training, great everything else. So I was able to do it in the short term for 7 or 8 weeks. But I don't think I could have maintained that for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Byron. I've heard of legends about Salnikov training before the 1980s Olympics for 4 years without a coach, just with his wife timing him. And I always thought that was insanely impressive, especially for a miler.
I mean, I'd heard that too, that his wife was coaching him, which I thought was a disaster in the making, but right, that was from afar. Again, he wasn't really coaching himself. I mean, yes, he was, but he had someone else there with a vested interest to, if all of a sudden, he said, I'm going to go 15 300s today. And after 7 of them, he went, yeah, I think I'm only going 10. His wife would say, I don't think so. All right. We agreed you were going 15 of these, right? And yesterday
you want dinner.
That's right. Yesterday you were going 310. Today you're going 315. I don't think that's very good. So I he wasn't alone per se, I mean, and as you notice, he was a pretty driven individual and a pretty smart guy. So, again, we're talking, he was the elite of the elite in terms of talent and work ethic. And on top of that, he knew the sport. There are some people out there that are very talented, but if you really look at it, they don't have a clue, and many people said, Ivan, and I knew a guy that knew him fairly well, that Mark Spitz burned out a little bit when he was supposed to be a superstar in the 1968 Olympics. He was supposed to win 5 or 6 or 7 gold medals there. And he really was a little bit of a brash youngster, and it didn't go over very well. And so I think the team wasn't behind him at all. And I think it kind of crushed him. And he performed below expectations, way below expectations. And I think it hurt him, inside a bit. And so there were a few years in there where he didn't train very hard, according to a lot of the people that talked to me. And yet he never lost still. He still beat everybody. It just, the world started to get a little bit closer to him. And then Olympic year, he got pretty excited again in 1971, 72, and went into the games. And of course, he beat everybody by a mile in every race that he swam, because he really ended up actually getting back into really good shape to use that talent that he had. So.
Thank you, Byron. By the way, just a question off of that. Do you believe that a very good sprinter should be a little bit lazy?
No, there's a loaded question.
Okay.
We have a sports psychologist here that says if you really want to excel, you've got to live like a dog. And everybody looked at him and said, "What do you mean, Peter?" And he said, "When a dog's tired, it sleeps." Right? And he said, too many elite sportsmen are not resting enough. That was his point. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a deep REM sleep for 12 hours, but you can't just keep pushing and be tired. And because if you're not neurologically sharp, you're not going to be able to perform at a level. So I wouldn't say that they have to be lazy, but they've got to be able to rest. They've got to be fresh. So I've known a few lazy sprinters, right? And I would argue that they probably didn't reach the level they could get because they thought they had to be lazy. They thought they had to conserve every little bit of energy, when really they just needed to be smarter about conserving energy and then using it when they needed to use it. So, okay, because laziness is going to spill over, I think, into everything you do. And if you're lazy, I don't think you're going to be sharp. And, if you got to win by 100th of a second, you got to be pretty sharp.
And I think also laziness is something that once you give into it a little bit, it starts eating on your life pretty hard.
I agree. Yeah, it becomes a lifestyle, and you don't need it to happen. I saw an interview with a guy that was I don't know if he's a hammer thrower or maybe he was a weightlifter. He was a massive human being. All right, I don't know if he was 380 pounds. I mean, he was huge. And his thighs are as big as our waists. And the commentator said, "So what's unique about you?" And he said, "What's unique about me is I carry a lot of girth. I carry a lot of weight around every day." He says, "I have to sleep 12 hours a day. I have to, or I'm just not sharp enough to be able to act." And then the other funny part was, and he said, "And I go through pants like crazy because my legs rub all the time." Right. So I don't know. I thought that was kind of a cute little insight that I'd never heard before. So.
The rubbing of the legs is really
yeah, if you have really big thighs, right? So I've seen some of those sprint cyclists that have huge thighs as well, right? And even here, some of the hockey players that I see, say professional hockey, they probably got that issue as well. So not too many swimmers.
Yeah, just I guess throw in some Vaselines in between your thighs and you should be good.
Yeah.
But thank you, Byron. I'm glad you touched base upon sports psychology. What is your opinion in sports psychology and swimming? And to be a little bit more precise, do you think a person is, I don't want to say born, but made when he is young, a psychologically resilient person? Or is it something you can work on and something you can improve throughout your life?
Well, I think maybe a handful are born, but I think a majority learn. I think it's a learned activity. And it's why I would argue a lot of the American swimmers are very tough, is because if you're not tough, you don't succeed, because it's a they grind them up and spit them out, because there's so many good swimmers, in the United States, that if you're not learning how to deal with the stress and the number of people that are trying to knock you off your pedestal, then you're going to get knocked off, and you're not going to succeed. And if you get knocked off enough times, you're going to lose faith when you go walking up to the starting blocks that you're actually going to be able to beat these people. So I think by the school of hard knocks, you're going to learn. The where you need a sports psychologist is when you haven't learned that growing up. Maybe it's been too easy. And in most of the countries in the world, other than the United States and probably Australia, if you're a pretty good swimmer, you're going to make it through your country's nationals. You're probably going to win. You're probably going to make teams, but you're not going to have to push yourself to the nth degree just to make a team like you are in some of those more countries with more depth. So then all of a sudden, when you get to the World Championships or the Olympics, you might have a little stage fright, and that's where a sports psychologist could probably help you sort of get over the hump if you're having a bit of an issue with that. I mean, if you get to the international stage and you succeed, hopefully you've done the right things and you're learning, and you've got a coach that understands to set you up for the right things. The sports psychologist can take it to the next level, but a coach has got to have a cursory understanding of what's going to help make an athlete, become a better athlete and get over those worries. There's always going to be one that isn't going to succeed, Ivan, right? I've had, every coach has had one, and you do everything right. They do everything right. And all of a sudden they get behind the blocks and they become, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. All of a sudden they become an entirely different person and they freak out. And I've done things, you try to get as creative as you can, and it could have been a guy or a girl. In this case, it was a girl. And I just said, look, I want you to count the number of good looking guys that you see on the pool deck as you're walking to the block up until the moment the gun goes, just, to try to distract, because we tried all the other things that, in essence, a sports psychologist could use. So I was desperate. I was trying to think of anything to try to get her mind off the race and everything, and it kind of worked. Right. But that's a limited, potential. You can only do that once, right? So
yeah. Plus, you require a lot of good-looking guys at the meet.
Yeah, that's right.
Not always happens.
What are you going to think about, right? So I worked once. Hopefully, that gave her a little confidence that she could succeed and go forward. But then you need a longer-term strategy, obviously. So sports psychology can work, but it's a double-edged sword, Ivan. I'm not a real big believer in sport organizations that bring in a sports psychologist during the Olympic year or the Olympic movement, and you can have a 20-minute appointment with them once a month. Well, I'm not so sure that that's gonna help, because would you bare your soul and trust this person who really, I don't think that well, if you're meeting them that infrequently, So I think if you're regularly meeting with somebody and you've got somebody in your back pocket that you trust, that's great. But otherwise, I think you're going to have to rely on the coach and hope they understand everything.
Makes sense. By the way, do you think a coach needs to have some psychological knowledge, or maybe potentially be a sports psychologist himself to a certain degree in order to be a good coach?
I think they have to have the knowledge. They have to have some knowledge. I don't know if they have to have a degree, all right, in sports psychology or anything, but I think again, it's a little bit of experience, and why some of the better coaches are the ones with more experience, because they've realized what does work and what doesn't work, and what buttons to push and what buttons not to push. And, you're talking anywhere from, a lot of, once you get to a higher level, you're only dealing with maybe a small group. A lot of the centers only have 8 or 10 athletes in them, but a lot of coaches also coach maybe 20 or 30 athletes. And most of the coaching public that aren't with national teams are certainly in charge of 20 to 30 kids in their group. And if you have 30 kids in your group, you've probably got about 24 different personalities. There may be a few that are similar, but a lot of them are going to be pretty divergent. So you're going to have to figure out what's going to make Charlie a success, and that's going to be different than what Steven's going to need and what Ivan's going to need. So
makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, it's if you're looking for a little bit of a longer term benefit. I mean, it's real easy to be the hard ass, as I mentioned way back when we started talking, and being the general and say it's my way or the highway and suck it up or you're not going to succeed. In which case, then I don't know if you're going to get the big success you need at the end, because you're not really helping the athlete grow. You're just basically, they're almost swimming out of fear. And fear is a great motivator to a certain point, but after a while, it loses its edge, I think.
Agreed. And fear could definitely, to a certain degree, it can enhance your performance, but once it passes a certain threshold, it just ruins your performance. You tense up.
Absolutely right. And you have to have realistic goals as well. And we worked with a sports psychologist a long time ago, and it was very interesting because, if you want to win the Olympic, you want to win an Olympic medal and go, 40, 45 in the 100-meter freestyle. And your best time's 48. Well, setting the goal to go 45, there's going to be an awful lot of roadblocks that are going to make you look like you're failing, and you can only take so much failure. So what this guy did was he said, I want you to chart your graph, and I want to chart it to the point where, you've got a realistic goal of 47 flat, let's say, for sake of argument. All right. And then I want you to put a dotted line to the 45, And so in the back of your mind, you're always thinking that you're still going for that big one, but there's an intermediate goal that's a pretty big goal. It's at the Olympic trials or whatever, that you can attain, because I think overreaching sometimes, I think is almost a bigger problem than underreaching. And because people go, well, how in the world am I going to go 45 when I can't dive under 23, right? It's kind of a self-defeating argument here, So you need something that's going to allow you to realize you can make a step forward. So,
for sure, yeah, I totally agree with you. It makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah,
it can be very overwhelming when you have your goal is very too far, as to say, and it seems like you're making a step towards the right direction, but you don't realize you're making it because the destination is too far. It makes sense.
Yeah, and the problem is, again, maybe it's social media, maybe it's whatever, but a lot of the young athletes that are coming up are going, well, yeah, but he always dreamed about being in the Olympics and doing that, so I'm going to dream about going this fast, and it's like it's a very difficult job as a coach to be able to then look at the athlete in the eye and go, that might be a little rich, like, are you really pulling the rug out from under them when they've got this big dream to go 2 minutes and they're a 2:09, IMer or something? And you just need to somehow be able to sort of work with them, but at the same time realize that failing for 10 straight months because they can't do a breaststroke split under 32 is really, going to be a problem, So you need to sort of manage gigantic expectations as well as, get them down to the near time where they can achieve some success. So.
Thank you, Byron. Can you speak just a little bit more? Because I remember myself when I was a swimmer, I had huge anxiety before every meet. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat the day of the meet. I was stressed out. And I think a lot of people suffer from the same problem I used to suffer. Do you have any advice on how to battle that pre-meet anxiety, especially considering you had, as it sounds, quite a bit of athletes throughout the years who suffered from similar problems?
Yeah, it's there's no easy answer. Even as an athlete, I was a bit nervous before races. The problem is, exactly who you're racing and you know how good they are. The secret really seems to come from belief in the program that you're in. So in other words, if you believe in the program that you've done and the work that you've done, and the coach has been able to, well, I think there's a little bit of the coaches have past success. So you believe actually the coach knows what they're doing. And then, if the coach says, well, if you're going to go 50 seconds in this 100-meter freestyle, we're going to go 24-26. We better be able to push 26s, no problem in workout. And if you can do that, you can go 50 seconds, flat, or 49.9, let's say, for sake of argument, right? Well, if you do that enough, now when the athlete's standing behind the blocks, hopefully they're going to mitigate some of their fear by saying, I've done these 25 highs push-offs till the cows come home. I'm going to be able to come home in 25 high in this 100-meter freestyle. I'm going to be able to go 49, So I think you're going to earn your confidence from the training, usually from the training that you've done. And I think that's something that the athlete has to really rely on. If they're going to try to get rid of their jitters and their anxiety, they're going to have to fall back on the process of the training that they've done, and they've done the right things at the right time. And so they are positioned to be able to succeed. I mean, there is a sports psych guy that we used 20 years ago. And he said, whenever you're worried, you're going, well, what if I don't go 50 flat? And he said, just put the word so in front of it. So, comma. What if I don't go 50 seconds flat? Nothing really. My life's not going to change. I'm still going to wake up in the morning. My parents are still going to love me, right? Like it's we have a tendency to overthink things, everybody does. And so his point was, take a step back. So if you don't do it, not the end of the world here, guys. Like you'll have another meet, you'll have another race, whatever. Obviously, it's a little more stressful if you're talking the Olympic trials and this is your only chance to make the Olympic team. But, because that's, so if you don't make the Olympic team, still not the end of the world, but it's a pretty big deal, right? So, but you've still got to fall back on the fact that I've done everything I can. I'm ready to go and have that confidence. It's why some of the athletes on bigger teams have more success than the athletes on smaller teams, because the athletes on the bigger teams see fellow teammates having success. And even if there's 10 people at the Olympic trials from the same team and one of them bombs, so there's probably 8 of them that had a success. So now all of a sudden you're the 10th guy and you're going, well, Christ, we're doing great. Right?
You have more faith that it works, right?
Yeah, as opposed to the little guy from Vladivostok that's all by his lonesome. And he's it, man, right? And he's got nothing else to fall back on except himself. And then you start overthinking it, so.
Makes sense. Thank you, Byron. Yeah. Thank you. That makes sense. Talking about setting goals, there is a tendency for young swimmers to set as a goal winning the Olympic Games or becoming the new world record holder.
Yeah.
And they try to have quite a defined path to it. It's like, all right, if I want to beat Michael Phelps' world record, then let's see how Michael Phelps swam when he was 13, 14. Am I beating this time? No, I'm on the wrong path, There's this mentality going on a little bit. Do you think it's necessary for a young swimmer to swim fast when he's young if he wants to swim fast when he's older, when he's a professional athlete?
Wow, that is one very loaded question, Ivan, right? I've had discussions with many people. I mean, it's a discussion I think that everybody has in the powers of authority in the sport, and also just playing outright on the pool deck. And the way I've looked at it is that I'm glad I coach senior swimmers, because I don't have to make that philosophical decision if I should really overtrain a young kid or not, or if I am or I'm not or whatever, right? But it strikes me that as a 14, certainly 15, 16, 17-year-old woman, girl / becoming woman, you actually can succeed at the world level. And so you could have some fairly lofty goals, and you might actually be able to attain them. Obviously, we had a wonderful example here in Canada. Penny Alexiak won the 100-meter gold medal in Rio de Janeiro. She was 16 years old in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something, So, just barely past her 16th birthday. And we actually had another young woman right behind her, Taylor Ruck, on the relays, didn't get the individual event, and she was only 2 weeks younger than Penny. All right. And she had one of the fastest splits on her 4x1 and 4x2. So you can succeed as a 16-year-old in the sport of swimming on the female side. So therefore, if a 14 or 13-year-old young girl says, I want to go to the Olympics, do everything, you can actually potentially consider that as a coach and as a family or whatever. But a 16-year-old boy, I haven't seen a 16-year-old boy in the Olympics in years and years and years and years, and it has to do with testosterone and strength and older boys and, men and all that, right? So I'm not so sure that it's a wise decision. I think we overtrain a lot of the young boys because they're not going to be world beaters until they get a lot older. The one thing I will say, and we had a gigantic argument here in Canada in the last 10 years, and the argument was, Ivan, that we fund athletes in this country based on world rankings, which I assume many countries do, but we've slanted it away now from world ranking in the sense of the purest world ranking. Now what it is, it's world ranking if you're top 16 or 20 or something like that in the world. But then for the next category of funding, it's based on your age and your potential ranking in the world when you become older. So in other words, for example, I have a breaststroke guy that was national champion here, but he's 25 years old. And his time, I think he's 40th or 50th in the world. Well, a guy that's 100th in the world that, is a couple seconds behind, but is only 17, he gets funded. And so that's a big dichotomy. But the argument is, and unfortunately for my guy, it's a very valid argument, is that at age 25, my guy's probably never going to win a medal for Canada, or even be in the top 8 at the Olympic Games, or even possibly even make the Olympic Games. He's a damn good swimmer, and he's national champion. And I believe that there should be an ability to help fund, because then he sets the bar higher for the young kids coming. So I think there's a merit in all of that. But in the purest performance sense, the 17-year-old might have a chance to get there, but the 25-year-old probably doesn't. Most of the great swimmers in the world, if they're, people are always saying, oh my God, he's 28 years old, he's 27 years old, they're so good, we should be funding kids when they're 27 and 28. The point is, Ivan, most of those 27 and 28-year-olds were top 10 or top 20 in the world when they were 19. They weren't 100th in the world when they were 25, and then all of a sudden when they woke up at age 26, they were 10th in the world. Like, they were already world beaters. Not at 16, not at 15, which is answering your question about young kids, right? But by the time they're 19, they're pretty darn good. And then they just hang on for years and get, marginally better probably. So I think for boys, really don't need to overtrain them. I think cross-training, I think lots of other things are, set them up in a good, basically you get great technique. It doesn't matter. If you have lousy technique, you could have all the ability in the world and you're going to go nowhere. So if you can get a good coach with good technique, then I think you're going to get ahead. Whereas girls, yeah, they can succeed pretty early. Obviously Penny's 6'1" when she was 16. So, that helped a little bit. She certainly had a nice frame on her, but they worked on her technique, and Ivan, I'll just keep talking here for 1 second, is that Penny was in the right place at the right time. And what I mean by that was, she's from the city of Toronto, and the National Center here was based downtown at my pool for the first few years, because the new pool in the suburbs where we hosted the Pan American Games wasn't built yet. And we brought in Ben Titley, the coach, one of the Olympic coaches from England, to come. He moved to Canada to take over sort of our sprint program, freestyle relay program, among other things. And so he was training in my pool, and we rent the pool out to a local club in the evening. And so Penny was a 13-year-old, and he said, who is that big girl, right? Maybe she could be a great one. We need to make sure that she's really working on her technique and getting the idea of what big time swimming is all about. So once a month, she would actually train with Ben's group, even though she couldn't hold a torch to them. But it was just the idea of thinking about it and touching base and getting the coach that was coaching her thinking about, down the road, this girl's going to be a pretty good swimmer, probably, no guarantees. And then at 14, it went to once a week. And then at 15, it went to 3 times a week. And by the end of the year, it was full time. And then at 16, bingo, bango, right? You could do that with 27 other kids that wouldn't win an Olympic gold medal. But had she not been in the city of Toronto and had that exposure and had that ability, I'm not so sure it happens. So there's a little bit of luck involved in this as well, Ivan.
Of course. I think professional sport is always a little bit luck-based.
Yeah, you're right. Right place, right time. Exactly. And I had a roommate at school that was one of the best 400 IMers in the world. in between Olympic years. Like he was a little too young and the first time, and then he was great right in the middle. And then he graduated and had to finish and had to get a job. And so 2 years later, by the next Olympics, he didn't go, right? And so, it's tough to peak every 4 years.
Byron, whenever someone speaks about luck in professional sport, I immediately think of Laszlo Che. That person could have been just so amazing, if not for so many factors that he wasn't in control of. It's just insane.
Like Phelps and Lochte.
But even before 2008, I think it was something like a month before the Olympic Games where he broke his foot.
Oh, yes,
he couldn't train. I feel like he had a very good shot at defeating Michael, actually. But once you don't train for a month, that's not good for a 400
even if you're Ryan Lochte, you're sitting there going, Jesus, I'd have been a household world name. I'd have made tens of millions of dollars if Michael hadn't been born, So, and maybe he wouldn't have gotten into trouble like he did too, right? So,
hey, at least Ryan got his gold medal.
Yeah, he's done very, very well. I mean, he's an incredible athlete, right? And the people in the sport certainly, and a lot of people do know him, right? So, but that's why people tune into the Olympics, right? Because it isn't a script. There's stuff that's going to happen, right? I mean,
for sure.
That's why sport it's why I think sport is going to get even more popular over the years, because with the plethora of Apple Network and Disney Network and all these other shows and everything that's happening, mainstream TV is losing its focus a little bit, I can't think of the proper word, but people just aren't tuning in every Tuesday at 9:00 to watch the show they used to watch. But sport is one of the only live things that they're actually going to tune into, and so therefore they're going to tune into their Sunday football or their football in North America, football in Europe, right? So and it's why the Olympics are so big, right? And hopefully we can continue to grow swimming so that the World Championships start to approach that kind of a thing. It's a live event; people want to watch it and tune into it. And obviously, the ISL is something that we're going to try to keep advancing on that stage as well.
Agreed. In an ideal world, this is a unscripted, incredibly emotional, unpredictable drama, which is perfect entertainment. But sometimes you don't achieve it, which is part of the unpredictability.
Well, and sometimes, sometimes great actors go into a movie with a lousy script. They don't attain success either. So there's no guarantee, obviously, right? So, but we need to get it a little bit more in the mainstream somehow. Get people to understand who the people are, who the players are. Obviously, you need superstars to help sell it. So, and we have some of those in the ISL. So. Anyway, that's a discussion for the future, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Byron. Byron, I also wanted to touch base with you a little bit on stroke techniques and technique in swimming in general. And to start this off, do you believe in a universally perfect technique for every stroke? Maybe it's something we haven't achieved yet, but we will achieve in the future. Or do you believe that everyone is just so individual that there is no perfect recipe?
There's certainly no perfect stroke, for the simple reason that some people have large wingspans, some people have smaller wingspans, some people are what I call floaters, meaning they, for whatever reason, they stay really at the top of the surface, and some kids obviously don't, and so because of that, that's all going to change sort of their angle of entry, where their heart enters, how it pulls, how it finishes, and just even the musculature that some people, they have more looser shoulders. Maybe their shoulders have a tendency even to sublux or whatever. So I don't think there's going to be the perfect technique. Now, there's certain basic elements that are usually going to work, nice high elbow recovery, et cetera, and freestyle. And, breaststroke by far and away is the most difficult, but, backstroke, obviously you don't go in, you don't lead with your elbow into the water. There's certain things that are going to hold true, but there's even some, a lot of people thought that you shouldn't breathe every stroke in butterfly. You really thought that was stupid because your hips would sink and you wouldn't succeed, and you wouldn't be streamlined. And then Michael breathes every stroke and everybody goes, well, maybe we should be thinking about this, so but for Michael, he stays pretty high in the water, like basically Michael's so high in the water that if he doesn't breathe, his mouth is right at the water anyway. So it's kind of like, well, if I'm already there, why the hell don't I take a breath? So whereas there's a lot of other athletes that, I've found in the last 20 years, the biggest difference in butterfly is the amplitude of the stroke, meaning how high you're coming up and how low you're going under the water after your breath and all that. It's really diminished. One of the first guys that did that, or I noticed it mostly anyway, was a sprinter of all things, Ian Crocker from the US. And I thought, man, this guy just skips along the top of the water. And of course, he went 50 point and broke the world record. And I just found that after that, a lot of people started minimizing. Butterfly used to be known for the big up and down, right?
Even used to teach you make the big wave and
yeah, absolutely, right. And for some kids, it's a good way to learn because otherwise they don't get it, right? But now I find that you're trying to minimize that amplitude of your stroke. So, but exactly how you're going to do it, I've seen kids breathe to the side. I think Laszlo Che did it a bit, right? And they shouldn't be swimming butterfly like that, but Jesus, they're winning, right? So, so there isn't one technique. There are a few general ideas for the technique, yes. And then there's the person that gets out there and revs at 60 revs, or like an Adam Peaty that breaks the mold and all of a sudden says, my legs suck. So I'm gonna win this with my pipeline arms and just turn over like a mad fool. And I'm exaggerating because he doesn't turn over ridiculously fast, but he does turn over much faster than historically people did. And most of the people today wouldn't realize that breaststroke years and years ago, back in 50, 70, 80 years ago, used to have a really exaggerated out kick, like they called it the frog kick. It was big and out and everything like that. And it was Doc Councilman at Indiana that decided that he had a kid that couldn't kick really well, but he had big arms like Petey. And he said, to hell with it. We're just going to have the kick. We're going to make this itty bitty little kick and we're just going to turn over like a bat out of hell. And there was a guy named Chet Jastrzemski and he broke the world record, smashed it. And all of a sudden it revolutionized breaststroke and said, oh, we don't have to do this big, huge squeeze the legs together kick. We can just do this little mini whip kick. And it changed everything. Well, now Petey's taking it to the next level because the kicks are even smaller. Like they're just, and we saw it in the ISL, Shimanovic and Sachi, like their kicks are minuscule, all right? It's basically just minimizing the drag behind them and using their arms at a really good level. So a long answer to your question. I think there's a certain type of a technique that, generally, but because of everybody's different bodies, you got 6'8" sprinters and you got, Morozov's probably not even 6 feet, is he? Right? I mean, you got smaller guys, bigger guys. So you can't have the exact same technique for everybody. So.
Agreed. Okay. Understand, Byron. Thank you. Well, you touched base on a lot of stroke specific techniques I like to touch base upon later in this podcast, but hey, kudos to you. Byron, by the way, do you think there's any actual value that goes into breathing to the side in butterfly? Because I've heard this myth or a legend, as to say, that the first person who started doing it was someone called Denis Pankratov. I think at some point he was the world record holder in all fly events, meaning 50, 100, and 200 long course. And the story behind this guy was that one day at a random practice session, he injured his neck pretty bad and he couldn't look up and he couldn't look to the left. So the only way he could continue swimming butterfly was breathing to the side. And this was before he became famous. But then he became famous breathing to the side and everyone tried to mimic it, especially in Soviet Union when it was still there. Everyone thought, well, this is the way to go. What are you talking about? Look at this guy. Yeah. So this is just a funny story. I don't know if you know it's true or something like that. But I don't see the benefit of breathing to the side in butterfly, to be honest with you.
Well, the benefit is two things. One, if for whatever reason your neck's not really supple, right? Like that guy when he hurt it, obviously, right? But and some people they can't get their neck to, I don't know, for whatever, I don't know why it would be that tight, but maybe they lift too many weights. But the by far the biggest detriment is that when you breathe to the side, it sometimes puts one arm a little bit harder to get them both around synchronously at the same time. And so I had a roommate at school that breathed to the side, but his arms kind of went whoop, like there was one that was just a little bit behind the other one, and it was almost like a gallop in butterfly, which is impossible to do, but it was like, whoa, all right. And I think I don't think you could ever sprint doing that because you don't generate enough power necessarily. But for longer distances, didn't Melvin Stewart breathe a little bit to the side as well? And he won the gold medal 3-4 Olympics ago, whenever it was, right? 90s. But so, you can have success with it, but it's probably for the ones that are not as efficient doing it in theory with the way everybody else does, right? So maybe they can't get up high enough out of the water. So
makes sense.
I wouldn't teach it though.
Makes sense. Thank you, Byron.
Yeah.
What about you know how some flyers have just a single kick when they do fly? The conventional butterflies 2 kicks, but some very rare talents are capable of doing butterfly kicks, disregarding their arm, whatever their arms are doing. And they tend to develop sometimes a 3 kick fly, sometimes it's kind of a 2.5. What do you think about that? Is the perfect flyer a guy who sort of has the ability to just go all out with his legs, disregarding what his arms are doing?
I haven't really seen much success with anybody doing that, Ivan. So I'd have to watch that a little more closely. I think it's a phenomenal, intriguing, I guess I would say, rather than phenomenal, an intriguing question. Years ago, when Canada started their coaching certification program, I was asked, along with a fellow coach of mine who now runs Mirtha Pools, to do the butterfly section of the manual. And so we both went home, wrote it, and came back. And I said, geez, you know what? I had trouble with this because I think there's 2 types of butterflies. And Trevor went, so do I. All right. There's the 2 kick fly that's dominant, with the when you're breathing. And then there's the 2 kick that are basically, both of them are really kind of the same, and they don't provide that much propulsion. And so that's what we submitted. And some Canada, everybody said, you guys are full of crap. Right? There's only 2 kicks and they're both the same speed and right? And I went, you know what, maybe to teach kids, that's a good idea. It's tough to figure out how to do the one stronger kick and the one medium kick, but I'm a firm believer that the sprinters need to have a powerful kick when they breathe, and the second kick is a little bit more for maintenance of body position, and in the 200, if you're good enough at it, you can still do that. But more importantly, or more often than not, the 200 predominant butterflies have 2 kicks that are just about the same power. The asterisk to all that is because women float much higher in the water and have a higher sort of propensity to be on top of the water, they don't necessarily need that powerful kick to surge up and get a breath. And therefore, I find a lot of women have a 2. Some of them even have a single kick. That great athlete that the U.S. had, Summer Sanders, that won some gold medals in the 92 Olympics. She was stunning. She was a world record holder, 100 fly, 200 fly, I think even maybe the 400 IM at the time. And she had a 1 kick butterfly. I mean, I literally asked to see films because I couldn't believe she could only be a 1 kick butterfly with her great butterfly. So you can do it with a predominant 1 kick, but I find that a lot of the butterflies, particularly in the sprints, use 1 powerful kick and a medium. And then in the 200, sometimes it's 2 mediums, and maybe it's just 1 and a little bit of a mini sort of knee bend or whatever. So
makes sense. All right, thank you. What about for sprinters that don't breathe during a 50 butterfly? Would you say it's not?
I think what we're starting to see now in a 50 butterfly is you just turn over like an absolute bat out of hell. And because of that, I think you just kick one, like wherever you can fit that kick in, it's good. And you're not going to have a big and a little one. They're just going to be as many and as powerful as whatever you can do. Like, it's just, it's not great technique even in the 50 butterfly. Even if you watch Caleb Dressel, who's got a beautiful butterfly, it's not his normal beautiful butterfly. He's coming out a little bit early on the pole. He's not quite finishing because he's got to get around and pull again. And so it's a horse of a different. It's almost a different event, the 50 butterfly versus the 100 and the 200 butterfly. I'm actually not a real proponent of having 50s in the Olympic Games, just because I think we're going to have. I mean, the more events, great for swimming. We can have swimming go over 12 or 14 days instead of 10. But I just it's just a pure power event. I'm not even sure if you train for it. It's just I like the 100s better, I guess.
Fair enough. It's hard to agree with you that you don't train for the 50. These guys are also
it's a different kind of training.
Yeah, crazy strong, and their sprinting ability is insane. But it's quite different from training for a 200, a 400, or even for 100.
Yeah, it is. I mean, some of the pure sprinters are born not made, and what I mean by that is if you could take a 200, you could take Marco Koch in the breaststroke. Bad example because breaststroke's not a power event as much, right? But you could sprint the bejesus out of this guy till the cows come home, and he's never going to be a 50 breaststroker. He just doesn't have that amount of white fiber, fast muscle fiber, I think. And reversely, you could train Petey forever for a 200, and I'm not so sure he's ever going to be a world-class 200 guy just because
good this season.
He did really well. Well, short courses helped with those extra 4 walls, right? But I just, there are certain people, the body types are just there. I've got a young man while he's in his mid-20s that I coach now. He's a 50 guy, right? And he can't really do a workout. He can't swim with anybody. He can't do 5 100s on a minute 30, but he can do a 50 really, really fast. And I watched the video of him, and he went to a basketball court, and he jumped up and he put his chin on the rim. I mean, that's a lot of white fiber. This guy's got a vertical jump that's out of this world, right? And if you ever seen Caleb Dressel, I know. If you ever seen Caleb, I mean, he's 6'6", but if you ever seen Caleb Dressel before he races, and he does a jump, I mean, he does one of those jumps where he jumps and then just kind of keeps going. He just keeps going higher, right? Like it's those kind of sprinters. Yes, you can need to train, and they need to do weights, and they need to do everything. But you can actually take somebody in a 200 and you can out-train another guy and beat him. Whereas if both of you are training in a 50 and this one guy's got all the white muscle fiber, you're going to have a hell of a time beating that guy, So it's a little bit of an advantage genetically for the pure sprints over somebody in the 200s where, you can actually out-train somebody and be fitter and actually beat people.
Makes sense. Thank you, Byron. And yeah, talking about the 3-kick butterfly, a person that implemented in a very high level was Nikolai Skvortsov in the 2008 Olympics. I believe he was also the finalist in 2012 Olympics in the 200 fly. He actually swam the 2 fly with a 3-beat kick. But if you're interested,
wow,
the video exists.
I gotta get some video. I gotta get some video and look at that.
Okay. Byron, sort of concluding question regarding the technique segment of this podcast, but if it was up to me, I could speak to you regarding technique for another 3 hours. But Byron, you are the coach of Kylie Masse, a world-renowned, defending Olympic champion.
Olympic bronze medalist, yes.
Yes.
World champion. No,
apologies. Yes. No defending problem. World champions.
Yeah.
What do you think of the new technique implementation Kira Toussaint brought to this ISL Budapest with the pull out where she does kind of like a freestyle pull almost on her back, and then she makes the breakout? What do you think of that? Is it?
Yeah. I mean, I looked at that. It was pioneered. Well, I think it was pioneered by a guy in Tennessee, Matt Kretich, and then some other people have been experimenting with it. Right. Initially, when I looked at it, I thought, holy Christmas, this looks like a real breakthrough. Tried it once or twice, and initially, I think what ends up happening is you do get a bit of an advantage right off the bat, but then you kind of stall because you're kind of caught, right? And then you got to come back over with the other arm a little bit, right? So I'm not so sure. Maybe I'm not brave enough to experiment with it anymore. But it's I guess the comparison would be, when people first started doing grab starts, it looked much faster, and it took a little bit for it to catch on before, believe it or not, we used to stand in the blocks and throw our arms in a big circle, which of course takes a half a second. I mean, it was pretty silly when you think about it, but we thought we got more momentum, but we really didn't offset the delay that it took us to get into the blocks from a grab start. It hasn't really taken off. So it leads me to believe that, in our sport, we have so many more scientists working now with all of our athletes that, I'm giving an easy answer that I think somebody would have figured out that if this was one hell of a lot better than every other backstroke turn, we would have had the stats and we would realize now that everybody should be doing this new type of a thing. So it may be something that's really tailor-made for 1 or 2 kids, but for a majority of people, it doesn't seem like it's that much of an advantage. So we abandoned it. Well, we didn't abandon it. We decided not to go forward with it and to stay with the backstroke, which, if there was ever an idea that we should, Kylie's underwater work is not as good as some of the world. Certainly not as good as some of the people in the ISL who are, very short course centric. They're better at short course than they are long course. So it's magnified when they're in a short course competition, like short course worlds or the ISL competition. So, but these, we're just going to have to get better at doing the normal breakouts and the normal backstroke underwater. So
makes sense. Thank you, Byron. Yeah, so, I was always interested why sort of, because as you said, for me as well, when I first saw that, I thought, why is no one else doing this? This makes perfect sense.
I know. Well, and the beauty was a couple of the kids who were doing it were beating everybody in their race by a lot because it was a high school meet or it was something else, right? Well, they were going to beat them by a lot anyway, So, but it magnified it and made it like, oh my God, maybe this is the new breakthrough. So, but I've lived through a bunch of those different kind of breakthroughs. Like, we used to even have to touch the wall with our hand on a flip turn freestyle. Think about that. There are a whole bunch of people used to put their butt right
dangerous.
Yes, yeah. You're either you'd hurt your elbow, or you had so much momentum, your bum would go right into the gutter, right? By the time you tried to do your turn. So, and there are nice advantage, there are nice, breakthroughs and stuff that come. And, the fact that we finally got to the point where we could do a backstroke turn by turning over onto our front. I mean, we had a national championships, but before that rule came out, and we had some backstrokers, and we had 4 guys, I think, that were in the top 10 or top 15 in the world. I mean, we had a very good bunch of backstrokers in I think it was the mid 80s. All right. But they all cut the corner real tight on doing what they call the suicide crossover turn. And, if you pass 90 degrees, you're obviously disqualified. And so at the end of this is the national championships, and it was short course. And at the end of it, the 4 guys are standing around talking to each other because they were buddies. They knew each other. And the official from the bulkhead comes walking down to tell the swimmer, because we had a rule then you have to tell the swimmer when they were disqualified. Now you just have to announce it. But back then you had to actually find the swimmer and tell him. And so the one guy, Wade, looks over to Sean and says, oh, Christ, I think she got me. I didn't touch on my first turn, and I was past 90 degrees on my 7th turn, right? And Sean goes, oh, well, man. He says, I missed my 5th and my 7th turn, right? And Mike says, I didn't touch on 3 of them, right? Right? And so then poor Sandy, who was second in the race, goes, you guys are a bunch of cheaters. I touched on all of mine. I did my turns all right. So, but that was the point. Like it was almost more interesting at the end of a backstroke race to see who got disqualified and who didn't get disqualified. So, I think it was really nice when we changed it to, get rid of that. That's not really part of the race. Let's just, get rid of that worry or that anxiety or that problem. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if down the road we get rid of the 1-hand touch, or the 2-hand touch, I should say, in butterfly and breaststroke. Because again, we had a big argument at the Pan Am Games here in 2015 because we had a girl that swam out of her mind, won the gold medal, and then she got disqualified for a patty cake, as we call it, a 1-hand touch, an unsynchronous touch in the breaststroke in the IM. And the next race, the guy got disqualified, who was going for the all-time record and the most gold medals ever won in Pan Ams by any individual athlete. And this was his last race. And this was going to be the one that was going to put him over the top. And he got disqualified.
You're kidding.
Yeah, couldn't believe it, And so I was explaining this to a friend of mine who wasn't a swimmer. And he looked at me, and he's a bit of a scientist, and he goes, does anybody really touch with 2 hands? And I said, well, yeah. I said, he said, no. To the millionth of a second, do they touch exactly at the same time? I said, well, maybe not. He says, so they're really not touching at the exact same time, are they? Right? He said, we're just talking degrees here. And so if you're deciding that it's within a 10th of a second, or is it 100th of a second, or is it within a half a second? Like what's the variable that you're looking at here, right? And I thought that's a really good point. Like we need to decide what is the variable, because somebody might think, oh, that's close enough, and somebody else might say, oh no, it's got to be much better than that. And I think that's what happened in these games I'm describing. So I would love to see them get rid of that rule. And I think, it's a very interesting thing that's going to happen in swimming right now, Ivan. We're losing the longtime president, or I'm not sure what you call him, emperor, that's been running FINA, right? And even the president, right? And so 2 guys that have really, one, some would argue, run roughshod a little bit over FINA, right? But certainly they've run FINA for the last while. Maybe not the most progressive, open, whatever. They're both now retiring. And that's a gigantic leadership void that we have to hope is maybe going to be more amenable to talking to the athletes more, to the coaches more, and maybe then, more progressive. So that's my hope. I mean, I could be fool's gold, but I'm hoping that this is a real big opportunity for change within our sport internationally.
Yeah. same goes for the ISL. It would be amazing to see some change and maybe a cooperation system with FINA.
Yeah, well, we can dream, right? But
Yeah.
you know, there are many people in the sport believe that would be the ideal situation. There are obviously roadblocks and things to get over to do that, right? But it certainly is something that I perceive as, you know, the number one a beautiful step forward if we can get there. But so,
Byron, I 100% agree with you that the rule regarding the not symmetrical touching of the hand should go. I myself got disqualified numerous times this week. For violating this. I hate the rule.
And it's hard, you know, and unfortunately, you know, the judges are trying their best, but it's not easy. You know, they make mistakes too. And you know, take away that potential of making a mistake when really, is it really helping somebody to do that? Marginally, but take it away from everybody then, so you don't have that problem. Anyway, yeah, I just, you know, it was like we used to have false starts. You used to be allowed 2 false starts, then you got disqualified on the 3rd one.
And everyone would do it, right?
Yeah, it was stupid. It was a waste of time and effort and energy, you know? And so all of a sudden we went to no false starts, and all the coaches and all the swimmers are screaming, oh, it's going to be so unfair. It's fine. It's not a problem. Now, I do hope that eventually they can educate the referees just a little bit more, because you know, they put in the rule, I think it's more explained now, that you have to gain an advantage. So in other words, right now, if somebody twitches on the start, but isn't twitching and going forward, they're just kind of, you know, a nervous twitch or whatever they think, but they don't move forward at all. Most referees around the world, unfortunately, still think that's illegal, and they disqualify them. And it actually isn't illegal. All right. You can twitch, and as long as you're not gaining an advantage, most people who twitch usually are gaining no advantage, because what they've done is they've realized they've made a mistake. And they actually kind of twitch and hold back. That's right. Exactly. Right. And by the time the gun goes, they're screwed. Right. You know, they've lost a few tenths of a second. So, but then they get disqualified, which is really silly. You know, it shouldn't happen. So that's, you know, my little bugaboo. I'd like to see them fix that if they can, you know. So
agreed, and especially considering the fact that they don't disqualify until post race. It's
what? I didn't hear you. Sorry.
They don't disqualify until the race is over. It's not like they're dropping flags or anything.
Yeah, I know. You know, you're swimming the whole race going, oh, am I going to get disqualified? You know, am I not? You know, so.
Makes sense. Byron, thank you so much. I had a blast talking to you, but we're going to be concluding the podcast. We're trying to focus on a shorter time for these podcasts. Yes, because apparently not everyone's willing to watch us for 3 hours on a Sunday evening. I have no idea why.
You and I can go for hours, but you know, we need to make it tight for the audience, I think. So, well, we can do this again sometime. That'll be great. So, I'm looking forward to this summer. Obviously, you know, we're hopefully going to have an Olympics, and you know, get some big names, some exciting, and like you said, I will be doing the commentary. This will be my 8th, I think it's my 9th Olympics, actually doing the television commentary for CBC here in Canada. So that'll be fun. And obviously I know, you know, the Canadian athletes and a bunch of the world level athletes, and getting to know a bunch of the others now through the ISL, which is you know, fun and exciting. And I guess we're going to have a draft real soon in the ISL. So that's going to be really, really cool to do something like that. So.
Agreed. Oh yeah, the draft is a huge headache, but yeah.
Well, it's getting anything that's brand new like that is going to have a few glitches, right? You know, but it'll be fun. I would argue it'll be good TV, man. So.
Agreed. And Byron, just maybe a couple of last final words to sort of the young swimmers who are watching us right now, with an interest of where swimming is going to sort of take its next steps to, and what kind of to focus on with all the changes that are going on right now. Do you have some kind of advice for these guys?
Bottom line is, I think if you're a young swimmer and you're in the sport, you know, love your sport. I mean, you know, do it. And the changes that are happening on the world level or anything like that really are not going to trickle down that much to a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old. So really enjoy your coach, enjoy your teammates, have fun, look forward to the meets, and realize that you're in a phenomenal sport. Yeah, I mean, you know, sure, I'm biased. You're biased, Ivan, right? But you know, I'm going to give you a small. I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to give you a small taste of this. Is that, you know, I had a parent that had 2 kids, one in swimming and one in another sport that I won't mention, and they basically said that it was real tough in the other sport because the kids weren't necessarily focused on improving themselves. It was all about the team and making a name, like making a sort of a name for themselves to maybe go into pro sports or whatever. But they really weren't thinking also long-term career in the terms of university and, you know, what it's going to do to them, right? Whereas the athletes in swimming is a sport where almost all the kids go to university. So you're in a group, a socioeconomic. This is more maybe for the parents. This is a little above a 10-year-old that's listening, right? But you're in a group that realizes that this is a good sport and it's great for you and it's a lifetime activity, and you're surrounding yourself with people that have like-minded goals that are really trying to do something, not just for themselves but for their group. There's community, their city. They're going to get a good job down the road, go to university, etc. And I just think it's a sport that really combines all of that to its other level. At the down simple tack, just enjoy it. Get in there, get into a program that you enjoy, and try real hard and succeed. And you are going to have some ups and downs, but you are going to have the ups are going to overcome the downs, and you're going to really enjoy the sport. It's a fantastic thing to be involved in. So,
agreed. Thank you so much, Byron. Once again, this was a blast.
Lots of fun.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Byron MacDonald for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Our next podcast will happen the upcoming Wednesday. Please tune in. And thank you for being with us on this Sunday evening. Evening, not for everyone.